may step out with the grandkids there for a little while and a bit. We'll see. I tell you what, I always learn when they come why God gives you children when you're young. There's a reason. I love it when they come, and oftentimes I'm ready when they go. I can say that here because y'all understand that, don't you? All right. So we'll wait just a second. We'll have our screen back up here in just a minute. But we are going to be looking tonight. We are in our, fifth lesson on Job. Chaplain did 2 with some of the natural things with creation that we see discussed, particularly from the words of God at the end of the book. And then we have been putting we started the narrative 3 weeks ago, so this is our 3rd lesson with that. And we have looked at the narrative as a play. Right, is anybody, it's your first time? Okay, so we don't have to explain that too much. We got a couple here, but they're quick and bright. So we are looking at it as if Shakespeare, who loved to write historical plays, if he were to write a historical play out of the ancient world, this would be an excellent script for him to use. Now, if they were setting up the stage, we would have a lower stage and an upper stage. Right? The lower stage is where Job and all of his activity takes place, and the upper stage is where? At the throne room of God. And now the beings in the upper stage can see everything that happens on the lower stage, right? But the people on the lower stage have no clue what is happening on the upper stage of the play. And we, as the audience watching, get to see both. And has the writer not thrown us for some loops in the first 2 chapters already? We don't have time to go back through all of them, so if you haven't seen them, go back and watch it. But we've been sitting here watching this play thinking we knew what would happen, and then twist after twist after twist of what is not rational, what doesn't make sense, and what messes with us. Now, tonight, we are going to move into chapter 2 and the rest of the chapter, and we are going to try our best to get through 3 verses. And many of you who have heard me teach know that this can be a labor. But we're going to attempt, don't laugh too loud, Brother Hanson, to get through these 3 verses. And we're going to talk tonight about what it means to have friends who are hurting. Pretty much every time we gather together as the body of Christ, we share some pains, don't we? We did it tonight. We talked about friends who are in pain, physically, perhaps emotionally, and oftentimes the 2 go together, do they not? Remember last week how we looked at the symptoms that Job experienced physically and the common responses to those physical symptoms. Many of them are psychological, emotional, mental. So tonight as we came together, we shared some of the needs of our friends who are hurting. Now, it's good and right that we would share those needs and we would pray together. But as Christians, we are very blessed in that our friendships do not simply stop at thoughts and prayers. So tonight we are going to look at the last part of this chapter, and we're going to add some new players to the play. So far, we have seen on the upper stage, we have seen God, and we have seen the accuser. We have seen the slanderer. On the bottom stage, we have seen Job. We are now down to 4 servants and a wife. So we've seen 5 people on the bottom stage. So tonight we're going to add 3. Now, just as we saw last week with Job's wife, she often gets bad press, doesn't she? But we looked at her situation and her story, as we talked about what it is like to be living with someone who has gone through something very difficult, like a terminal diagnosis, like a debilitating disease, like a mental illness, and how that affects all the parties in the home, right? We don't go through those things alone. It affects all of us. Tonight, I am going to try in 3 verses to give some redemption to 3 friends who also get bad press. Now, when we get to chapter about 5, we're going to begin to see why they get bad press, and we'll look at that. But tonight, we're going to have some very good and practical examples of how we can respond when our friend is hurting. All right, so are you ready? Okay, we're going to start off here, and we are now in scene 4. And we're going to start at chapter 11. Now, we remember where we left Job in verse 10. We have left Job on the ash heap. He is outside, because remember when we talk about having him on the ash heap, when you take out your ashes, where do you put them? Outside the city, out at the garbage dump with all the other things. This is the ash heap. And so he is out there with a skin disease, and so he is not welcome within the boundaries of the town. He is out with the other people who are not welcome for whatever reason. Now, we know from chapter 1 that he was the big man in town, right? The greatest man in the East. He was used to servants and wealth and all of that. Go back to chapter 1 and remember all of that. And he's gone from that position in society to now the lowest of the low, not welcome in his town, not welcome in the seat he used to sit at the city gates. He is now outside of the city on the garbage heap. Because of his health issues, he cannot be in the city, so he's outside of town. Now, let's see what happens next. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard. Now, let me tell you this. We have lived long enough to know that when bad things happen, news travels fast. Doesn't it? And people talk. When something happens at Maranatha village, it doesn't take very long before the whole village knows, right? Yeah, it doesn't take long. Without social media, without any of those things, everybody had heard what happened to Job. You know, this is normal, especially if you're the big shot in town. They break in the news when something happens to you. I remember the first time I realized this. I was in 2nd grade and watching cartoons about 2:30 in the afternoon. Bugs Bunny, I remember it. And they interrupted Bugs Bunny to tell the world that Elvis Presley had died. 1977. Now, many other people died on that day, but they didn't break in the news. And if you're going to interrupt Bugs Bunny, it better be important, at least when you're in 2nd grade. They interrupted because it was the big man in town. It was important news that everybody would want to know. Because you see, when big guys fall, when the important people fall, people want to know, oh, how the mighty have fallen. And I'm sure that there were many different reactions when people heard the news. Some may have been very concerned. Oh, did you hear about Job? Oh my goodness, I wonder how his wife is doing. And there were others at the station there where they were fueling up the camel who leaned over and said, hey, did you hear about Job? No, what happened? Oh man, he lost everything. He's poorer than we are. Oh, you're kidding. He's going to see what it's like now to be just a regular guy. And some of the people may have, had a reaction. The rich man in town has troubles, and it can be tempting to inwardly reflect. It's about time, maybe even enjoying the news that somebody who has had so much now is facing difficulties. Now, we know that the neighbors heard, and even the people that didn't like Job, because you can't get in a place and position like Job without having some people that don't like you. Class envy is a real thing. We don't know how the neighbors and the people who didn't like him reacted to what they heard. But this says that Job's 3 friends heard. And it's one thing when I heard that news that Elvis Presley had died. It was another thing over in Oklahoma City at General Council at the Executive Presbyters meeting when Jim Hamill got that news that Elvis Presley had died as the pastor of Memphis First Assembly, who had had him in his church. He reacted much differently because, see, when friends hear, there should be a little bit of a difference. Like tonight when Chaplain said that Warren Flattery, whom we've been praying for as he's just buried his wife, when they said that he fell, Chaplain didn't even have to say what happened. He fell, and I heard because we know what a fall can mean at 90-some years old. And we know he's already hurting. And so we react when we hear that. What do we do when we hear that friends are in trouble? Now, let me just say that Job probably had more than 3 friends. I hope. But we're going to see something unique about these 3 friends. He has had these friends, and here's something that I want us to see as a principle. It is important for us that we make true friends when we don't need them, and then they will be there when we do. Far too many people live life closed in, not sharing, not reaching out, not establishing relationships when things are good. And the trouble is when we don't establish relationships when we are in good times, then when the bad times come, those relationships are not there. Now, I'll go back to some songs from my youth in the 1970s. There was a group, Simon and Garfunkel. Okay, thank you. Somebody, Brother John, has heard of Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel had a song that says this: I've built walls, a fortress deep and mighty that none may penetrate. I have no need for friendship. Friendship causes pain. Its laughter and its loving I disdain. I am a rock. I am an island. Now, if Job had lived according to that kind of concept that Paul Simon writes about in that song, then this book would have been very different. But when times were good, he had established some friendships so that now, when he is in a difficult place, there is someone who hears and is going to react well. We can't expect people to just appear out of nowhere when we need them if we haven't cultivated that friendship ahead of time. So this is a good principle. Now, here's some things that we need to learn about being friends. Now here's, and I wasn't quite sure which words to use, so these are in quotes. Because there are basically 3 kinds of people in our lives. Our superiors, and that's in quote because really we know that nobody is superior to any others. We are all equal, right? But let's face it, we know who our superiors are, right? The boss man, the regional director, the wealthier, the people who have this or that. And we live in a culture, which I stated earlier, where class envy is way too much of an issue. And we see people who have power. And we think that gives us a right to look at them in a different way. Oh, the general superintendent is going to be speaking next week. He's not. But let's just say the general superintendent was coming. And we all know, okay, that's in our hierarchy of things, that's our superior. Is it quite possible that we can be friends with people who are in positions above us? Sure it is. Sometimes and too often we are not as friendly. We get a little nervous maybe, or we think that they don't want to be our friend. And so what can happen then is when people in positions like that find themselves in need of a friend, it can be harder to find one. I learned this at a district council many years ago because Norm and Cleo Toston were still our superintendents, so that's going back a ways. And I was a young minister's wife at this district council, and I didn't know anybody. I knew who the Tostons were because they were the superintendents. And the speaker that night told us all to go find someone and ask how we could pray with them. Well, I looked around and I didn't know anybody, and I saw Sister Toston and I knew her, and she didn't have anybody sitting next to her, so I went over and said, Sister Toston, how can I pray with you? And here's what she said to me. She said, thank you for coming over to me. She said, I can't tell you how many times I'm in a service where they do something like this and no one comes to me. Now, I was just young enough to be ignorant not to know I was supposed to be intimidated. But we need to remember that we can make friends with people who we look at as our superiors, and we can do it without envy. We also need to make friends with our peers, people who are regular people just like us. And here's a news flash, that's 99% of the world. Regular people. But some of the problems is when we're around people who are like us and on our level, that there can be a competition that sneaks in to those kinds of friendships. And we have to learn how to be around people without feeling like we're in some kind of a who's got the leg up on this or that. And there are people in our lives who, to match the word up there, and you see again, it's in quotes, inferiors. We know there are no people inferior to another, but we need to remember that it is possible to be friends with people who may be in a lower state or position of life than you are. Now, I didn't say it's possible to be nice or be possible to just throw something this way. I said it's possible to be their friend. That means to enjoy their company, to be with them just for the purpose of being with them because you enjoy their company. And you just sit with them and talk and go places without having to feel like you have to cover this and you have to cover that, enjoying people as people. One vacation we took, we were in Atlanta, and I tend to rise a little earlier than some of the others. And I'd gotten up one morning, and Sean and the kids were all still asleep, and so I decided to go for a walk. Our hotel was in downtown Atlanta, Motel 6. And so I took off early in the morning to walk down. I was going to walk down to the King Center just to see how far it was from where we were staying. And the unhoused population in Atlanta is a real problem. And so early in the morning, you've still got people sleeping on the streets. And so when I travel, I'm a mom, and so I always have a pack full of granola bars because somebody is going to be hungry at some point in the trip, and you're going to have something. And so I had pulled down a granola bar. I'm walking down the street eating my granola bar for breakfast, and I see a gentleman just waking up over on the sidewalk and sitting up, and I'm eating my granola bar, and so I went over and sat down next to him, told him who I was, asked him his name, asked him if he'd had breakfast yet, and he hadn't, so I gave him a granola bar, and we just sat there and talked for a little while, and before I got up to continue on my walk, I just put my arm around him and said, I'll be thinking about you today. here's what he said. He said, that's the first time in months that someone has touched me. Can you imagine living without physical touch? He didn't need a handout from me. He just needed somebody to treat him like a person. And we need these. And if we will be this kind of person and establish these relationships when things are going good, then when we are at the place that we need a relationship because we need some help, we have already built it and it's there. That's a good principle. Job had friends before any of this happened. All right? So, now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they came. Did you catch that? They heard, and then they came. Now, we know that everybody else had heard, right? Big man, everybody knows what has happened. You don't have that kind of tragedy and the whole surrounding area doesn't hear about it. We don't know that anybody else came. Have you heard about Job? Oh, I sure have. That was bad. Can you hand me another slice of bread? Oh, yeah, I heard what happened to Job. Boy, isn't that heartbreaking? Well, I got to go get the camels fed. I'll see you around at the next thing. When we're in adversity, our lives stop, but other people's lives go on, don't they? For those of you who have lost a spouse or a child, someone very close to you, you know that after all of the memorial service and everything like that is taken care of, everybody else's life goes on. They go home, they continue on, and you're the one that is going to have to figure out how to live with this new normal. But for these 3 friends, we're going to find that they stopped their lives for a little while. When they heard, they came, each one from his own place. Now, here's something I want you to catch. Here's a principle for us. True friends share in grief as well as in the comfortable times. And I want you to catch this, and they don't need to wait for an invitation. It is very doubtful that Job sent out invitations to people to come and join him on the ash heap. Now, these 3 friends had probably sat on Job's silk couch many times, but now they're going to come and sit with him on an ash heap. And we really do need to learn a little bit about this last part, this invitation thing. Too many times, we know someone is hurting, but we put the burden on them to reach out to get the help. And we do this trying to be polite because we're not quite sure what to do. And so we say things like, call me if you need anything. But sometimes when you are at the bottom of what's going on in your life, you don't have the strength to call. And even if you did, you really don't know what you need. So what would you ask for? We don't see anywhere where they send out invitations to join them at the dump. But here's something that I think is interesting. Have you ever noticed that nobody mails out invitations to a funeral? Think about that. We send out invitations to weddings. We send out invitations to parties. Those are planned well in advance. We know they're coming. There's plenty of time to get word out. But for a funeral, they're planned quickly, sometimes within a matter of days. And we don't need to send invitations like we do to a party or a wedding because everybody should know it's okay to come. You just hear the news and you instinctively know we are gathering on Tuesday at 1 o'clock to honor the life of our friend. We instinctively know that we are needed. We need to be invited to share in the good times, but in bad times, we don't need to wait for an invitation because we are needed. We instinctively know I'm a Southern girl, and so I was raised, as soon as you hear that someone has died, you immediately bake a casserole. It's just what ought to be done, because you need to do something, and you don't know what else to do. So you break the casserole, you send the groceries. We ask them, what's your favorite restaurant? And then we send a gift certificate. I had this happen to a friend. They had called and asked for their, what's the place you like to eat? And they gave him the name. And he told me later, he said, usually we spend about $25 if we have a meal. In 2 days from them telling them what the favorite restaurant was, they received in the mail a gift certificate for $250. That was 10 meals that they could have whenever they wanted it, without having to plan ahead of time, just when it was one of those days when they just needed something. 10 meals provided. And they didn't have to ask if it was okay. Some things you just know are needed. One of the most precious things I think I've seen in this, after my uncle died, and I was helping my aunt with things, somebody, one of the neighbors that I don't think was at the funeral, they just came by the house and brought her a roll of stamps. They said, we know you're going to need to be sending out little cards, just thought you could need a roll of stamps. And I thought, what a practical, good idea. We just show up. When they're in the hospital, we show up. We get a key and we feed the cat. Right? They lose their job. We get a gas card. Something that says, I care, and we don't have to wait. Now, some of us, and this is something that those of you who have pastored will understand this. Sometimes it is difficult to do these things because there are some people that don't like other people to know that they are hurting. But it's hard for people to help if they don't know that you're hurting. So as the chaplain's wife, maybe he wouldn't say this, although I think he would, but as his wife, and I know I said this as a pastor, if you are in the hospital or sick or in need, call your chaplain. They want to know. Believe it or not, it's his job. And some people, I was in the hospital for 5 days and nobody came. Look at that, I didn't even know. And those of you who have pastored have been in that situation, have you not? All right, so they come and they don't have to wait for an invitation. There is a principle that we find in the more ancient world that we don't see as much today, and that's this concept of a covenant of friendship. We certainly see it with David and Jonathan in the time of Samuel, right? Where they made a covenant together, that they would be bonded together as friends. And this example, it makes me think of this covenant, because we know what a covenant is. Any of us who have been married have made a covenant. We've stood in front of an altar and we've made vows. And I've wondered if it's not something that we need to consider in friendship as well. A covenant of friendship. I have 2 friends like this that we have simply over 40-some years, and one of them 50 years. It's been a matter of, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, good times and bad times, I will be here. We make that covenant in marriage. But I believe that it is okay, and not just okay, but well of us, to make those kinds of friendships. Richer or poorer, sickness and in health, I will be your friend. We need these people, and the older we get, I think the more we need them. And so this is just an important thing. Now, let me just throw this out, because this idea of a covenant friendship, who's not just going to leave you, who's not just going to say, well, you're in a tough spot, I'm praying for you, but is going to be there and show up. The world is looking for that kind of friendship. Did you know that there is a place that is designed to be that kind of place where those kinds of friendships are made. A place where everyone can go, regardless of their social status, their job, their marital status, their gender, their age, their color, their nationality. A place where you can find friends, people who will say, for richer, for poorer, I am here in this with you. We long for that kind of place, don't we? There's a song in the 1980s that described it. It said, making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. And they're always just the same. You want to go where people know troubles are all the same. You want to go where everybody knows your name. How many of you have heard that song? Now, when the world was describing that longing, those of you who have heard the song, what place were they talking about? A bar. A bar in Boston called Cheers. But could I tell you that I think that song describes what the church ought to be? A place where you can come and you are there sometimes 1, 2, 3 times a week with the same people, sharing your needs, sharing your joys, sharing what's happening in your life through the good and the bad, meeting together. And I'll just throw this out because I think this is one thing that we have lost. Oh boy, I'm going to get nitpicky here. Please don't. But when our churches dropped Sunday school, we lost an opportunity for this kind of thing because you just can't find that just coming to sit, look at people on the platform, sing a song, listen to a sermon, and then go out. You need a small group that you are in it for the long haul together. As I look out here, I see people from my Sunday school class. We're in it. So when we heard that our one of our class members who hadn't been able to be in class in over a year passed away and his wife wasn't sure what to do for the dinner, even though they hadn't been there in a year, we stepped up. That's what we do. It's a covenant of friendship, a covenant. When we join a church, understand this, when you join a church, you don't just make a covenant of what you'll do for that church, but that church makes a covenant with each member. We are here for you. That's what needs to happen in the church. And when it doesn't, then that needs to be addressed. All right, done nitpicking? Now, it names these 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. One thing I'll throw out here, history remembers these names, at least the people who read Job. Remember these names. The ones who didn't show up, their names are gone. These are the names we remember, and they happen to have come. They're in 3 different locations. So Job, as a businessman, had traveled. He had made connections with people who are in different parts. I didn't put it on a map because there's just too much disagreement among scholars where all these places are. But they are for sure in different locations on the map. These are not people who all live in the same neighborhood. And I want you to catch what these 3 men did. They made an appointment together. An appointment. Now I want you to think about making an appointment. No cell phones, no email. They don't live next to each other. No cell phones, no email, no postal service, not even a Pony Express that we are aware of. But somehow from these 3 different areas, and so this takes time. Job has been on the ash heap for a while because this doesn't happen overnight. Job has been sitting out here struggling for a while. They somehow contact each other and say, on the 25th of this month, we will meet at Job's place. Be there. And they made an appointment together to come and to show up. Let me just give you one more principle here. Good friends get together intentionally. Intentionally. Do you catch that word? Here's what we do too often. Let's get together sometime. Yeah? And sometime never seems to happen, does it? We have to get intentional. Hey, I'm going to be going here on the 11th of November at 2 o'clock. How about I come by and pick you up? Some intention, some thought, because good friendships and working together in this way does not happen on its own. Somebody has to take the step to make it happen. And so they made an appointment to get together and go and bless their friend. And this is just important for us to do, isn't it? We had a situation in the church that we pastored in Iowa where one of the young ladies in the church, who was new to the church, she was from a rough background, and she'd been coming for about 6 weeks or so, and she had an admission to the psych ward, and she was there for an evaluation, and she was there a couple days. And she contacted somebody in the church to go over and make sure her cat was okay. And so when my friend went over to check on that and saw the state of her apartment, she knew why she was struggling. And so she called me and said, this is, when I went over there, wow, this is what I found. And I said, okay, tell you what, let's get about 5 other women. You've got a key. We'll go over, and when she gets out of the hospital, she can have a, so what we did was, we did about 9 loads of laundry, washed probably every dish that poor little lady had, because it was out. The sink was full, the laundry was everywhere, food rotting here and there. And when she got out of the hospital, so we locked it up, then snuck away, and I'll tell you, we had more fun cleaning that apartment than I've ever had cleaning. As the 5 of us got together, we were singing and thinking about, oh, this is going to be so exciting, and all the things that were needed. And when that young lady got out of the hospital and went home and realized that she wasn't walking back into the same mess that she had left, she knew she had friends. What do we do when our friends are in pain? We show up. We show up. And they made, so this is the 3 friends, it says they made an appointment together to come. Sometimes we need to just show up. Here's a principle for us. True friends know that sometimes the greatest present is just presence. It's just presence. To know that you're not alone. I remember one time in December, several years ago, I just wasn't feeling well, and I was down. I was very depressed. And I just wasn't okay. And the kids had gone out, Sean had gone out, I don't know where, but I was laying upstairs in my bedroom just feeling depressed, and I heard a noise from my kitchen, the worst rendition of Jingle Bells that you could possibly imagine. And I thought, what has happened downstairs? And so I come padding downstairs to see what on earth is going on, and my friend, who had a key to my house, had let herself in with 3 other friends, and they were just standing in my mess of a kitchen singing Jingle Bells at the top of their lungs, the worst possible way they could. That's friends. They didn't say a thing about my kitchen. They didn't bring me anything. They didn't offer to do the dishes. They just came to make me laugh. Sometimes we have to get past our tendency to avoid people in pain because we don't know what to say or do. And here's something: you don't always have to say or do anything. Sometimes you need to just come. A card out of the blue that says, "Thinking of you," that just shows up at just the right time. A message on a Facebook page that says, "You crossed my mind this morning, and it made me remember when we did this." and bring a smile to a face. I'm glad you're my friend. Now, let's take a look at this next thing that they had. They made this appointment together to come to sympathize with him, the scripture says. Now, this word sympathize, there we've got a root word and we've got a prefix. You see this here? We've got our root word and here's our prefix. Now, our prefix here, SYM, is a prefix that's when it's added to a root word, it tells us that something is similar, right? Like a synonym. Lord, two words that mean the same thing. Synonym, thank you, Synonym, two words that mean the same thing. And the root word here is pathos, to feel. To feel. And so what this means is they came, first off, but they came with the purpose of sharing in his feelings. To say, wow, Job, that really stinks. That really hurts. And they feel that hurt with them. Not to just acknowledge that you're hurting, but to communicate what hurts you has hurt me. Pain shared is pain halved. And so they come to sympathize, to sit in that moment and feel that pain with him. I heard a story on the radio. A mother had called in. They were wanting to share testimonies, and she had a little 4-year-old son who often went over and bothered the elderly neighbor next door. Just one of those very friendly, gregarious kids that was always kind of like a Dennis the Menace and Mr. Wilson kind of thing, always getting in his hair and doing stuff. And the man's wife died. And about 2 weeks after she had died, he was sitting out on his porch. The little boy saw him and went over there, and the mom looked out the window, and she saw him sitting with the old man. And she thought, oh, what on earth is he doing now to bother him? And so the little boy came back, and she said to him, honey, what were you doing over there at his house? And she said, well, I went over, and he was crying. And she said, oh, what on earth have you done? So what did you do? And he said, I just cried with him. Sometimes we just need somebody to cry with us. So it says they came to sympathize and to, I put that in, let's skip that. To come to sympathize and to comfort him. Now, comfort is a word that we use all the time, but here's what it means. To comfort is an attempt to ease the difficulty. I am a cold-natured person, and so on my bed, especially in the winter, is a comforter. And I love my comforter because it wraps around me and it eases the difficulty of the cold night. It makes the burden a little bit lighter. So this comfort that comes along to lift and ease the burden, it may not make the burden go away, but it can ease that burden. So here's another principle for us. True friends comfort. They make an attempt to ease the difficulty and make the burden lighter. This is where the practical things come in. Running the errand. When you know your friend is giving a big dinner and they've got a lot of stuff on their plate and you know that they're going to make a queso, and so you just, while you're at the store, you just pick up some extra cheese sauce and run it by just in case. Running that errand, watching the kids. One thing that I have found that is often needed when there is a death, someone to make the phone calls. Because you get tired of calling every person you know. Someone to make the calls, someone to clean the house, someone to bring a meal, an attempt to ease that difficulty and take some of those burdens and put them on yourself rather than on the shoulders of your friend who is already carrying more than they can manage. Is this not a practical chapter? Okay. And then the friends who have committed themselves to three things: to show up, to share in the pain, to sympathize, to share in the pain, and to comfort, to ease the difficulty. These three friends now, it says, when they lifted up their eyes at a distance. So they have met, they're coming together, and at a distance, they lift up their eyes and they look, and they know where Job's house is because they've been there several times. So maybe they go to the house, and the wife comes to the door and they say, hey, we've heard you guys have had a hard time. We're here to see Job. Oh, well, you're not going to find him here. I'm the one having to cover everything. I've been out working and slaving away. There's nothing in this house to give you. But you'll find Job outside of town, out at the ash heap, if you want to talk to him. And it says that when they saw him, they did not recognize him. He was there, but he didn't look like he was supposed to look. They couldn't see him. But I want us to get this, that for real friends, even though they didn't recognize him, they still looked to find where their friend was. Because sometimes our friends have changed. The hurts, the pains, the difficulties of life, sometimes our friends find themselves in really nasty places, and we look for that friend that we knew and loved so much. And the person is there, but we can't recognize our friend. What do we do in those times when they have changed or in a place that they don't want to be or we don't want them to be? Sometimes we see people and say, oh, you've really changed. And that means, oh, you've lost 30 pounds. You look great. Other times we see people and say, oh my God, you've really changed. I have a friend from high school that I tried to find a couple years ago. And looking for her, I couldn't find her on Facebook, and I was down in Houston and trying to find, and nobody knew where she was or what had happened to her, and I hunted and hunted. Finally, and I knew her husband's name, so I looked him up, and I found that he had been arrested and was in jail, but that gave me at least a town and a county, and I continued to look to find my friend, and finally found her, and through the magic of the internet, got a phone number. Called her up out of the blue. Hadn't seen her since 9th grade. And we were talking, and she said, I'm surprised you called me. And I said, well, I've been looking for you. And she said, aren't you still a Christian? And I said, yeah. She said, well, didn't anybody tell you I'm a witch now? And I said, no, I hadn't heard that. She said, yeah, I'm a part of a coven down here in Lake Livingston, and I was surprised that you called me. And I said, Tony, I called you because you're my friend. She had changed, but my friend was still in there. And how often do we forget that addictions, lifestyle choices, we can't be ashamed or hesitant to continue to love someone just because they're sitting outside of town on the ash heap, scraping themselves with the difficulties of what life has brought their way. This friend of mine, I had actually led to the Lord in junior high, and she married a young man she met at our church. They went into ministry, had been pastoring a church. And he molested their children, went to prison for that molestation, and the church completely turned their back on that young woman. And she reached out to another community and changed her belief system. And to this day, though, when she is in trouble, she calls me. She knows I don't agree with all of that, but she also knows that a friend loves at all times. Even when there's been a difficult change and we don't recognize who they are anymore. What a principle. When they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices. Ah, Job! Job! And wept at the change in their friend. At what they saw in this man that had been at the top of the pinnacle and the difficulties, and it caused them to grieve. And each of them tore his robe and they threw dust over their heads. Note, they reacted in the same way Job reacted when he got the news. He tore his robe and he threw dust over his head. And so they are reacting in a way of personal mourning. Here's a principle for us. True friends freely express the depth of their feelings. They cried with him. They joined him in the expressions of grief and pain. You know, when you're around people who truly care, you don't have to hold your feelings in. You know, sometimes you're in the hospital and some people come to see you and you have to put on a good face. And others, when you see them coming in, you just relax. And know that you can just be freely expressive of your feelings. And this, by the way, cost them something. Tearing of the robe. They couldn't go to Walmart and just get another one. There was a cost to this grief. It's okay to let people know that their pain hurts you. I remember one time when some friends of ours were getting a divorce, and their 17-year-old daughter, matter of fact, mom was moving out the very day before she was to start her freshman year in college. And I went over to help. I did not agree with her leaving, but I told both her and her husband, I won't let you go through this alone. And so I helped them pack. I helped her move in along with her husband who helped her. Driving back, I said to him, how are you doing this? And he said, I don't know. And I looked at him and said, Marty, I hate this. I couldn't give words to make it better because they weren't going to make it better. I just said, I hate this. It's okay to express the depths of your feelings. When your friends are hurting, they need to know that you are hurting with them. And you need to be able to show it. And so then they, Bildad, Eliphaz, these guys, these fancy guys from Job's big days, sat down. Now, where was Job? Ash heap. He's down in the garbage dump. So where did these guys have to sit? He didn't have a little lounge sitting there to receive guests. Where did they sit? They had to join him on the ash heap with him. Do you catch that? True friends are not turned away by the distasteful sights. Have you ever visited somebody in the hospital and the smells were not pleasant? Have you ever come in and somebody just needed, because especially when we get older, things don't work the way they always did, and sometimes we need somebody to willingly expose themselves to our mess. And that's what these three friends did. These fancy guys, they just didn't say, wow, Job, this is hard. Can we send you something? It says they sat down with him. True friends don't turn away from the hard sights, and they protect the dignity. I remember one time I was making a hospital visit, and the gentleman was laying in the bed, and you know those hospital gowns are not modest. Not even close. And he was sitting there having no idea how immodest he was. And when somebody else from the church came in behind me, the best thing I knew to do was just to go stand in front of the place where they wouldn't be exposed. But we don't turn away from those things when we are friends. We come in those messy times in the middle of the night. This is what friends do. I want you to catch a verse from Ezekiel the prophet. As the man of God, and he says this in chapter 3, as the people are there in Babylon, the people of Israel, the people of Judah. He said, then I came to the exiles. Watch how similar this is. I came to the exiles who lived beside the river Shebar, and I sat where they sat. That's a typo there. The word says, I sat where they sat. Oh, how much we need people who will sit where we sit. Not just when it's good and fancy, Sister Betty. Not just when we're all getting together to go to the restaurant and have a good time. But when we're not at our best, when we're in our ugly cry, when we don't smell good, when we're in trouble. I sat where they sat for 7 days. Then they sat down on the ground with him, lo and behold, for 7 days and 7 nights. I want you to catch this. True friends sacrifice their own needs to be in it for the long haul. 7 days. That's a long time to sit in the garbage. It's a long time. But they shared their time. They sacrificed their time. This is what happens when, somebody that takes a fall and now they've got a wheelchair and they can't get in the house. And so a bunch of the guys get together to go over and build a ramp. You know what I'm saying? And I guarantee you that all those guys that show up on Saturday to build a ramp for their friend, they had things at their house that needed done. But they sacrificed that day off to come and build a ramp for their friend so that his burden would be just a little bit easier. Now, I want you to get this next part. It says that they sat there for 7 days and 7 nights with no one speaking a word. Oh, if they had only kept that the rest of the book. With no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. True friends understand, and so really have to say very little. I remember a horrible night that led into a horrible morning. I got a call about 8:30 on a Wednesday night, had just left the church, from the parents of a good friend of my daughter. He had just come home from Iraq, having been over there about 6 months, and had come home on leave. The wife had been holding the house together with the kids, but they knew their daughter was struggling. And that evening, they'd called for her to come down to join them out in front for some ice cream. And she didn't come, and finally Dad went upstairs to see where she was and found his 15-year-old daughter hanging in her closet. This father took a knife from his back pocket and cut the belt to bring his daughter down, called 911, and called their pastor. I called 2 friends who I knew they were very close to, Randall and Jackie, and we hightailed it over to that house. Got there probably about 9 o'clock, the 3 of us, and for the majority of the next 8 hours, we just sat. After the ambulance had come and taken Lexi out of the house, Jeff and Vanessa very realistically didn't want to go back in. And so we sat out on the driveway in late September in Omaha, and it was a little cold. But until 5:30 in the morning, we just sat there. Every once in a while, somebody'd say something like, it's a little cold, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And then we didn't say anything again. Finally, I realized it was 5:30, and I knew I had to go home and get my kids up for school and tell my daughter that her friend was dead. Horrible night, horrible morning. And sometimes we don't have words, do we? And the problem that sometimes when we don't know what to say, we don't know what to do, we simply don't do anything. But there are times when there isn't anything to say, but just being there. And those are times together that you will never forget. To sit with a friend while they undergo the chemo treatment for 4 or 5 hours. To go to the funeral home, to go to the doctor, to give a ride, to sit and listen to your friend whose children won't even speak to her and she doesn't know why. Sometimes we just need to be there. And I want you to catch something. For 7 days and 7 nights, it says, no one spoke a word, for they saw his pain was very great. When chapter 3 opens, the silence is broken by a voice. Whose voice is that? Job. They didn't speak until he spoke. They let him take the lead, and sometimes that's just what we have to do. We sit in that silence and pray and ask God, help me to know how to best love my friend. And then we follow their lead. And when they speak, we respond, and we don't have to have words that fix it, because you know what? Words won't fix it. But you can say, yeah, I get it. There's some principles here. We're going to skip all of them because I've already given them to you. That's just them in summary. But I want to give you this. We talked at the beginning about you have to make friends when times are good to have them there when times are bad. Because you don't get this kind of friend just out of the blue. Little poem I learned when I was a little girl in school. I went out to find a friend, but could not find one there. I went out to be a friend, and friends were everywhere. And this is how we as the body of Christ learn to live. We need friends. But if we decide that we're going to wait until somebody comes to be our friend, we may find that we have a long wait. So if you come to church and say, nobody ever invites me for dinner, next Sunday, invite somebody for dinner. And lo and behold, you'll have a friend for dinner. I'd like us to end with a little song that we don't sing near enough of. It's from the late 1700s. But I think in this difficult lesson, this was not a fun lesson, was it? Very practical, but difficult, because the book is difficult. But there is a song from the late 1800s, we'll maybe come back to that I want us to end with, because it so describes what I believe the Lord desires for the body of Christ. We should not, as Christians, be alone. God made us to live in community. And at Maranatha Village, we are so blessed to be in a place where there are a lot of people who need a friend. And we have opportunity after opportunity to step out and be that friend. So how many of you know this old song from the 1700s? Sure you do. Not that y'all were around. But let's sing this, and I want you to catch the words, and I want you to think of Job's 3 friends as you sing this song. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Before our Father's throne, we pour our ardent prayers, our fears, our hopes, our aims are one, our comfort and our cares. We share our mutual woes, our mutual burdens bear, and often for each other flows the sympathizing tear. From sorrow, toil, and pain, and sin we shall be free, and perfect love and friendship reign through all eternity. You know, not only will heaven be heaven because of Jesus and our family and the freedom from the aches and the pains, but our friends that we have made here on earth. Blessed be the tie that binds. Let's keep the tie a little tighter, shall we? It blesses me when I see Brother Sharp and Brother Tigert come in every Wednesday. They just sit together as friends. Harvey and Martha, good friends, taking care of each other. Oh, how we need each other. Some of you sitting here need a friend. Some of you sitting here need to be a friend. One of the best places those two find each other is at an altar of prayer. Lord, as we close up this lesson on this friendship in these 3 verses, Lord, would you help us to tighten the tie that binds? And when our friends are hurting, to show up, to sympathize, to feel their pain, to sit where they sit, to weep as they weep, and to comfort, to ease the difficulty, even if all we can do is sit and be present. Father, would you help us to be those kind of people? And would you help Maranatha Village to be that kind of place? In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. I know it is late, and we need to get going. Next week, we're going to jump into when good theology goes bad. That'll be fun, won't it?